Inside a crumbling South Central gym, a veteran congresswoman expects applause until a former cop steps to the mic. A mansion, campaign money, family ties, and a paper trail collide as constituents fall silent. What begins as a friendly town hall turns into a public reckoning that threatens decades of power, loyalty, and carefully rehearsed politics with consequences no one expected. The gym at John C. Fremont High School had the tired look of a place that had been promised too many things and delivered too few. The walls carried the dull pallor of paint that had been applied decades ago and never refreshed, as if even maintenance had learned not to expect miracles here. The hardwood floor bore long scuffs and darkened patches where the grain had given up trying to look new. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering in uneven rhythms that cast sharp shadows across rows of metal folding chairs. 200 people sat in those chairs, not arranged for spectacle, but for routine. These were not activists flown in to make noise. They were residents, Black and Latino families, retirees, small business owners, veterans, single parents, people who lived month to month, who knew the arithmetic of rent increases and grocery prices better than any policy memo. Many of them had voted the same way for as long as they could remember, trusting that loyalty would eventually be rewarded with results. On the stage, a folding table stood beneath a banner that read, "Community Town Hall." At its center sat Maxine Waters, 33 years into her congressional career, a veteran of Washington politics, a committee chair, a figure whose name carried weight in national headlines. Her posture was composed, her suit immaculate, her hair and makeup untouched by the harsh lighting. A nameplate rested in front of her microphone, angled just enough to be read by cameras positioned at the back of the room. To her left and right, two staffers leaned in and whispered occasionally, their eyes scanning the audience. This event had been planned carefully. Pre-approved questions, supportive speakers, the familiar choreography of political reassurance. It was meant to show presence, control, continuity. It was meant to remind constituents that their representative was still fighting for them. At the back of the gym, local reporters adjusted tripods. A few national media cameras lingered as well, there because something unexpected had happened earlier that day. On a radio show with millions of listeners, a former law enforcement officer had announced he would attend this town hall. He had said he had questions, public questions, and because this was a public event, there was no clean way to stop him from asking. When Bongino walked in, he did not hurry. He moved with the confidence of someone who had spent years in rooms where authority mattered. Shoulders squared, gaze steady, his presence immediately visible. Cameras followed him instinctively. He did not take a seat. The moderator, a local activist selected weeks in advance, tapped the microphone and began reading from a clipboard. "We'll be taking questions from community members who signed up earlier," she said, her voice practiced, reassuring. "Please remember, this is a space for respectful dialogue." Bongino did not wait to be called. He walked down the center aisle and stopped at the standing microphone, the one placed for constituents to ask questions. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture dramatically. He simply stood there, tall, still, forcing the room to acknowledge him. The moderator hesitated. "Sir, we have a process. This is a public town hall," he said calmly, his tone clipped but controlled. "I'm here to ask a public question." Waters saw him then, really saw him, and her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. This was not a friendly face from the district. This was not a donor. This was not a supporter looking for reassurance. This was someone who did not need her approval to speak. "I welcome questions from my constituents," she said, leaning slightly toward her microphone. And I welcome answers from public officials, Bongino replied, turning his eyes directly to her. Especially when those answers go to the heart of representation. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. People leaned forward. This was already different from the usual exchange of applause lines and policy slogans. Bongino paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be felt. "Congresswoman," he began, "you represent one of the poorest districts in America. Median household income around $31,000. A poverty rate hovering near 24%. Many of your constituents live in apartments and housing projects, struggling every month to pay rent." He did not accuse. He stated facts. "You," he continued, "live in a $6 million mansion in Hancock Park. Not in this district, 12 miles away. One of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Los Angeles." The words landed with a dull thud, not because they were shocking, but because they were familiar. People in the room had heard whispers of this for years. They had seen pictures online, brushed them aside, told themselves it didn't matter. Bongino looked around the gym, taking in the peeling paint, the flickering lights, the folding chairs. Then he looked back at Waters. "How do you represent people," he asked, "when you don't live among them?" For a moment, no one spoke. Waters adjusted her posture. "I don't think my personal real estate is relevant to a discussion about economic policy," she said, her voice even, practiced. Bongino nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a predictable answer. "It's absolutely relevant," he replied, "because representation isn't theoretical. It's lived. You claim to fight for affordable housing. You claim to understand poverty. But you live in a mansion your constituents could never afford, in a neighborhood they could never move to." He let the sentence hang, then added quietly, "That's not representation. That's distance." The room stirred. A woman in the third row nodded slowly. A man folded his arms tighter across his chest. This was not an abstract debate about policy frameworks. This was about proximity, who shared the same streets, the same risks, the same daily calculations. Waters leaned into her microphone again. "I grew up in this community," she said. "I know what struggle looks like." "I don't doubt that," Bongino replied, his tone softening just enough to sound almost sympathetic. "But let me ask you something very specific. When was the last time you struggled?" The question cut differently. It wasn't loud. It wasn't hostile. It was surgical. "You've been in Congress since 1991, he continued. "That's 33 years at a six-figure salary, plus benefits, plus influence. You own a multi-million-dollar home. So when you say you understand struggle, are you talking about memory or reality?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That's a fair question." Waters began to respond, but Bongino held up a hand, not to silence her, but to slow the exchange. "I'm not asking about your intentions," he said. "I'm asking about your position. Because there's a difference between advocating for the poor and living like the poor. And voters deserve to know which one you're doing." He gestured gently toward the audience. "These people live here. They deal with underfunded schools, rising rents, crime that never seems to go away. They see you during elections. They see you on television. But they don't see you at the grocery store. They don't see you at their churches. They don't see you on their streets." He paused. The gym went quiet. "That matters," he said finally, "because distance changes priorities." Waters's staffers leaned in, whispering urgently. She shook her head slightly, as if brushing off an inconvenience. "This sounds like an attempt to distract from my record," she said. from the policies I've fought for." Bongino nodded again. "We'll get to your record," he said. "But before we do, we need to establish something basic. Representation is about alignment. And right now, there's a visible gap between how your constituents live and how you live." He took a breath, then added, "And this is just the beginning." He reached down and pulled a thin folder from under his arm, holding it loosely, not opening it yet. The gesture was deliberate. A promise, not a reveal. "There are questions about money," he said, "about family, about power, and about what happens when someone stays in office for decades without delivering results." Waters' eyes flicked to the folder, then back to his face. The room felt tighter now, as if the air itself had shifted. "But first," Bongino said, returning his gaze to the audience, "you needed to hear this question, because everything that comes next only makes sense if we start here." He looked back at Waters. "If you truly represent them," he said, his voice steady, "you should be able to explain why you chose to live so far from the people you claim to fight for." He stopped speaking. No applause followed, no boos either, just silence, the kind that signals attention, not agreement, the kind that precedes something heavier. And somewhere in that silence, the shape of the evening changed. The folder did not look heavy. Thin cardstock, clean edges, the kind of thing people underestimate because it lacks drama. But in rooms like this, rooms where power expects deference, paper is weight. Paper is memory. Paper is the one thing talking points can't shout down. Bongino didn't open it right away. He let the room sit with the image of it first, the way a prosecutor lets the jury notice the envelope before the exhibit comes out. He shifted his stance slightly, squared himself to the microphone and lowered his voice. "Before anyone accuses me of theater," he said, "let's be clear about what comes next. Everything I'm about to reference is public, filed, signed, available to anyone who wants to look. No leaks, no anonymous sources." He glanced at Waters, then back to the audience. "This isn't opinion. This is record." He opened the folder. "Let's talk about campaign money," he said, "because that's where representation turns into obligation. You give money to a candidate because you believe they'll use it to fight for you, to reach voters, to win elections so they can govern on your behalf." He paused, then added, "That's the theory." He reached inside the folder and pulled out a stack of printed pages, held together with a simple binder clip. He didn't wave them. He didn't dramatize them. He held them the way cops hold paperwork, careful, deliberate, as if every page might be read into evidence. "Congresswoman Waters," he said, "I want to talk about your daughter." A ripple moved through the room. People shifted in their seats. Some leaned back instinctively, uncomfortable with where this was going. Others leaned forward. "Her name is Karen Waters," Bongino continued, "and according to Federal Election Commission filings, your campaign's own filings, you've paid her over $1.2 million from campaign funds." Waters' face tightened. Not anger yet. Calculation. "She provides legitimate campaign services," she said quickly. "This has been addressed before." Bongino nodded. "We'll address it again," he replied, "because repetition doesn't make something right. It just makes it familiar." He turned slightly and motioned toward the wall behind him. A staffer accompanying him stepped forward and connected a laptop to a borrowed projector. The hum of the machine filled the room for a moment. Then a spreadsheet appeared on the peeling gym wall. Rows, columns, dates, dollar amounts. "Federal Election Commission reports," Bongino said, pointing with his finger. "Year by year, cycle by cycle." He read slowly, carefully, as if speaking to people who deserved clarity, not speed. From 2004 to 2006, $318,000. From 2008 to 2010, $450,000. From 2012 to 2014, $287,000. From 2016 to 2018, $207,000. He stopped. "That's $1,262,000, he said, "paid to your daughter." The numbers hung in the air, large and awkward. A man near the aisle whispered, "That's more than I've made in my whole life." Bongino didn't react. He let the projector do the work. "Now," he continued, "the immediate response is always the same. She earned it. She provided services. So let's talk about those services." He flipped to the next page. "The filings list the work as slate mailer management." He turned to the audience. "That's campaign jargon. It means managing endorsement flyers, designing them, printing them, mailing them. It's not nothing, but it's also not mysterious." He reached back into the folder and pulled out another document. "I contacted multiple campaign consultants in California," he said. "Democrats, Republicans, people who do this for a living. I asked them a simple question. What does slate mailer management cost for a congressional race like this one?" He didn't rush the answer. "The range," he said, "was between $50,000 and $75,000 per election cycle. One consultant said maybe $100,000, if you're being generous." He clicked to the next slide. A simple comparison chart appeared. "Your campaign," he said, "paid Karen Waters over $200,000 per cycle, sometimes more." A woman in the fourth row raised her hand halfway, then dropped it, then spoke anyway. "That's 3 times what it should cost." "Yes," Bongino replied without looking at her. "About that." He turned back to Waters. "So here's the question," he said. "Why did your daughter get paid 3 times the market rate?" Waters leaned forward. "The services provided were comprehensive," she said, "and everything was approved by campaign finance attorneys." Bongino nodded again as if he had expected exactly that answer. "Approval isn't the same as justification," he said, "and legality isn't the same as ethics." He let that sit, then continued. "There's another detail people should understand. Karen Waters doesn't work for a major consulting firm. She doesn't run a large operation. According to filings, she operates under a doing business as name, Progressive Connections." He paused. "I tried to find Progressive Connections," he said. "Office address, employees, website, anything." He clicked again. The screen showed blank search results, empty listings. "There's no office," he said, "no staff, no independent footprint. It's essentially a pass-through entity. Money goes in. Services are claimed. That's it." A murmur ran through the room, sharper this time. "That's our money," a woman said out loud. "We donated that." Bongino finally turned toward her. "Yes," he said. "It is." He faced the audience fully now. "You gave money believing it would help this campaign reach voters. Instead, a significant portion of it went to a family member, at rates far above what the work typically costs." An elderly man stood slowly, bracing himself on the back of a chair. "I gave $50 last election," he said, his voice trembling. "That was groceries for me." Waters opened her mouth to respond, but Bongino raised his hand, not sharply, just enough to ask for one more moment. "And it doesn't stop there," he said. He flipped another page. "Your grandson," he continued, "paid tens of thousands of dollars for security services." A few people laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "I've worked protective details," Bongino said. "I know what professional security looks like, and I know what it costs. This wasn't that." He stacked the pages back together. "And then there's your husband," he added. "Paid for consulting." He didn't linger. He didn't need to. The pattern was clear. "Daughter, grandson, husband," he said, "all paid from campaign funds, all benefiting from your position, all while this district struggles." Waters' staffers leaned in again, whispering more urgently now. Her jaw tightened. "This is a smear," she said. "My family has done nothing wrong." Bongino's voice stayed calm. "I didn't say illegal," he replied. "I said wrong." He stepped back slightly from the microphone, creating space, then stepped forward again. "And here's where it matters," he said. "Because this isn't about paperwork. It's about trust." He gestured to the people in front of him. "When you live in a district where $31,000 is the median income, when people are choosing between rent and medicine, campaign money isn't abstract. It's hope. It's belief." He looked directly at Waters. "You took that belief," he said quietly, "and you redirected it inward." He flipped one last page and held it up. "This is a report from the House Ethics Committee," he said, "not an attack group, not a radio show. Congress itself." He read aloud carefully. "The committee has concerns regarding the level of compensation paid to family members relative to market rates and services provided." He lowered the page. "That's congressional language for you're paying your family too much," he said. The room went quiet again. Not stunned silence. Something heavier. Recognition. Bongino closed the folder, but he didn't put it away. "And we haven't even talked about the bank yet," he said. He looked at Waters one more time. "But before we go there," he added, "there's a simple question that deserves an answer." He paused, deliberately. "Wait, he asked. "Should the people in this room keep donating to a campaign that treats their money like a family allowance?" He stopped speaking. No one clapped. No one shouted. The projector hummed softly against the wall, illuminating numbers that no amount of rhetoric could erase. And for the first time that night, the distance between the stage and the folding chairs felt very small and very exposed. The word bank landed differently than campaign. Campaign money felt personal, intimate. Neighbors giving $50. Retirees sending checks they could barely afford. Banking, by contrast, belonged to another world. Cold rooms, closed doors, meetings that happened far from gyms with flickering lights. And yet, in this moment, the two worlds were about to collide. Bongino didn't rush into it. He let the weight of what had already been said settle, the way a prosecutor pauses before introducing the charge that changes everything. "Let's talk about power," he said at last. "Not campaign power, government power." He opened the folder again, this time removing a thinner packet. The pages looked older, the ink slightly faded, as if pulled from an archive rather than a printer. "In 2008, he said, the country was collapsing. Banks were failing. People were losing homes, pensions, jobs. Congress created an emergency bailout, hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money, to keep the financial system from imploding." He stopped and looked at the audience. "Everyone in this room remembers that year," he said. "Some of you lost everything." A man in the second row nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the floor. "There was a small bank," Bongino continued, "called One United, minority-owned, poorly managed, on the brink of failure. He flipped a page. "And your husband," he said, turning to Waters, "sat on its board." Waters stiffened. "I advocated for minority-owned banks," she said quickly. "That's part of my job." "And you owned stock in that bank," Bongino replied, without raising his voice. "Between $250,000 and $500,000 worth." The room shifted again. This wasn't about optics anymore. This was about stakes. "In September of 2008, Bongino said, before the bailout money was even distributed, you personally arranged a meeting between One United executives and the Treasury Department." He let that sentence breathe. "You didn't do it publicly," he continued. "You didn't call a hearing. You didn't advocate broadly for minority banks as a class. You made a phone call. You opened a door." Waters leaned toward the microphone. "I was acting on behalf of my constituents." Bongino nodded once. "Which constituents?" he asked. "The ones sitting in this room, or the ones sitting on the board of a failing bank you had a financial interest in?" He raised the packet and read aloud. Not quickly, not dramatically, just clearly. Representative Waters arranged a meeting between Treasury officials and One United Bank executives. That's from the official record. He turned the page. Treasury officials were not informed of Representative Waters' personal financial interest in the bank. The words echoed in the gym, sterile and damning. "That," Bongino said quietly, "is called a conflict of interest." A woman near the back whispered, "She helped her own bank." "Yes," Bongino said, "and it worked." He clicked the projector again. A simple timeline appeared. "Shortly after that meeting," he said, "One United received $12 million in bailout funds." He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. "That money stabilized the bank," he continued, "protected its investors, including you." He looked at Waters. "While millions of Americans were losing their homes," he said, "you used your position to protect your investment." Waters shook her head. "That's not true," she said. "I was trying to help the community." Bongino tilted his head slightly. "Then why didn't you disclose your interest?" he asked. "Why didn't you recuse yourself? Why didn't you advocate for a general program instead of a specific bank tied to your family?" Silence. He turned back to the audience. "The House Ethics Committee investigated this," he said. "Not Fox News, not talk radio, Congress." He read again, slower this time. "Representative Waters violated House rules by creating the appearance that she used her official position for personal financial gain." He lowered the page. "That's the finding," he said. "Official. On the record." A man stood abruptly. "What happened to her?" he asked. "What was the punishment?" Bongino met his eyes. "She got a letter," he said. The man blinked. "A letter?" "A letter," Bongino repeated. "No fine, no removal from committees, no referral to prosecutors, just a warning." He let the disbelief in the room expand. "I was a cop," he said. "I investigated financial crimes. When regular people use their position to steer government money to their own investments, they don't get letters. They get charged." The room went quiet again, heavier than before. "And this," Bongino continued, "is where we talk about protection." He stepped slightly to the side, as if addressing an invisible jury. "Long tenure creates leverage," he said. "Committee chairs raise money. They influence legislation. They protect their own. And in return, they're protected." He gestured toward Waters. "6 times," he said. "That's how many times nonpartisan watchdog groups flagged her for ethical concerns. 6. He flipped through pages, reading years aloud like a drumbeat. 2005, 2006, 2009, 2011, 2012, 2013. He closed the packet. And yet, he said, she's still here. A woman in the front row spoke softly. Because we kept voting for her. Bongino nodded. Because the system only works if voters enforce it. He paused, then shifted gears. Now, let's talk about standards, he said. About what's considered dangerous rhetoric, and when. He gestured to the projector again. A video clip froze on the screen, a still image of Waters speaking at a rally. This is June 2018, Bongino said. Listen carefully. He played the audio. Waters' voice filled the gym, clear and unmistakable. Instructions about confronting officials in restaurants, gas stations, department stores. About creating crowds. About pushing back. He stopped the clip. That's not policy debate, Bongino said. That's instruction. He clicked to the next slide. Images of officials being confronted in public places, dates and headlines beneath them. These things happened, he said. After those words. He turned to Waters. You called it peaceful protest, he said. But when violence erupted elsewhere, when another political leader used aggressive language, you called it incitement. He paused. So which is it? He asked. Do words matter? Or only when they're spoken by someone you oppose? Waters began to speak, but Bongino held the moment. This isn't about parties, he said. It's about consistency. He looked back at the audience. If you believe rhetoric can lead to harm, he said, then everyone is responsible for their words. If you believe it can't, then stop pretending outrage is principled. The silence that followed was different now. Not confusion. Alignment. Bongino gathered the papers, stacking them neatly. Money, he said. Power, protection. Double standards. He looked at Waters one last time in this phase of the night. And the question isn't whether you survived these moments, he said. You did. The question is, why? He turned back toward the audience, his voice lower. And that answer, he said, brings us to the hardest part of this conversation. He paused. What has actually changed here? He asked. After all these years. The gym waited. Bongino didn't answer his own question. He let it hang there, suspended above the folding chairs, like a weight everyone in the room could feel pressing down. Then he turned back toward the projector and clicked once more. This is where politics stops being abstract, he said, and starts being measurable. A new slide appeared. 2 columns. One labeled 1991. The other labeled Today. This is the year you were first elected to Congress, Bongino said, nodding toward Waters. More than 3 decades ago. He didn't rush the numbers. In 1991, he read, the poverty rate in this district was roughly 22%. Median household income, adjusted for inflation, was higher than it is today. Unemployment was lower. Graduation rates were low, but improving. He clicked to the next column. Today, he continued, the poverty rate is higher. Median income is lower. Unemployment is up. Crime remains stubbornly high. Homelessness has exploded. A murmur spread across the room. Not surprise, but recognition. This isn't ideology, Bongino said. This is outcome. He gestured toward the screen. After 33 years, longer than most people's entire careers, this district is worse off by the metrics that actually matter to families. Waters leaned toward her microphone. We've secured federal funding, she said. There have been programs. Name one measurable improvement, Bongino replied, not raising his voice. One. Silence. He waited. 5 seconds. 10. A teacher in the back stood up. "I've taught here for 30 years, she said. Same broken classrooms, same lack of resources, same kids falling through the cracks." A small business owner followed. "My shop closed last year," he said. "No help, no outreach, nothing." A veteran spoke next. "I came home and stayed here," he said. "I didn't move away. I'm still waiting for the change she promised." Each voice stacked on the last, not rehearsed, not coordinated. Lived testimony. The kind no chart could capture, but no statistic could contradict. Bongino stepped away from the microphone, giving them space, letting the night belong to them. When the room finally quieted, he returned to the center aisle. "This is what representation looks like," he said. "Not speeches, not seniority. Results." He turned back to Waters. "You've been in office long enough that excuses don't apply anymore," he said. "If things get better, you take credit. If they get worse, you still want patience." He paused. "At some point," he continued, "longevity stops being experience and starts being liability." He picked up one final page. "Let's talk about your legislative record," he said. 33 years, 13 bills signed into law, most of them symbolic, naming buildings, designating commemorative days. He looked up. "That's not governance," he said. "That's ceremony." The room felt different now, heavier, more personal. Bongino turned fully toward the audience, his back now to the stage. "I don't live here," he said. "I don't vote here. I don't get to decide who represents this district." He took a step forward. "You do." He let the silence build again. "So I'm not here to tell you what to think," he said. "I'm here to ask you a question that no talking point can answer." He gestured back toward Waters without looking at her. "After 33 years," he said, "after the mansion, the family payments, the bank conflict, the ethics findings, the double standards, after all of that, does this woman represent you?" The gym held its breath. An elderly man stood first, slow and careful. "No," he said. "She represents herself." A woman in her 50s stood next. "I voted for her every time," she said. "Nothing got better. She doesn't represent me." A younger man followed. "My kids are in the same schools I was," he said. "Same problems. Same promises." The words came faster now, louder. "She used us. She got rich. We stayed poor." Waters tried to speak, but her voice was swallowed by the moment. Bongino raised his hand gently, asking for quiet. "This," he said, "is the verdict." He turned back toward the stage one last time. "Representation isn't about surviving scandals," he said. "It's about delivering for the people who put you in office." He stepped closer, not threatening, just direct. "You had power," he said. "You had time. And you had trust." He paused. "And you spent it." He gathered his papers and closed the folder, not triumphantly, but definitively. "This isn't the end of the story," he said to the audience. "It's the beginning of accountability." He walked toward the exit, leaving behind a room that no longer felt routine, no longer felt controlled. Waters remained seated, surrounded by staff, facing constituents who were no longer clapping, no longer nodding, no longer pretending. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the silence that followed was not confusion. It was clarity.